Okay, we are still dealing with a very crucial period in the formation of the Middle East. In fact, I should have stressed from the beginning that the term, the Middle East itself as a term, became widely known as a result of the First World War. It's a very curious term, the Middle East, for reasons I will explain in a minute. But first let me say that the term was not coined in the First World War. It was known in diplomatic and political circles in London and in Paris and in the United States from before then, from around the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. It's a curious term, however, because when you think about it, the Middle East, as opposed to what? When you think about that term, the Middle East as opposed to what?
Right East.
The Far East or the Near East. So the far and the near and the middle, what is the vantage point compared to what?
Europe.
Compared to Europe. I mean, this is what we call a Eurocentric term. It's a term that comes out of Europe to refer to another area. It's not a term that, in other words, that is generated from within the region itself. It's a term that was created by people living in London, living in Paris, living in Europe, looking at this part of the world. It's not a term that the people in the region themselves used to refer to themselves. But let me say, having said that, it doesn't mean that the term now is not used. It is, of course, used. What is the most popular Saudi newspaper? Sharq al-Awsat. What is the name of the Lebanese national airline company? Middle East Airlines. What's the name of this official or semi-official Egyptian news agency? What's the name of this class? No, this class is not called the Middle East. It's called this Survey of Modern No, Modern Arab World. It's different. It's different. So, in other words, the term picked up. The term is now used indigenously, but its origins are external to the region. They're not from the regions. And this is, as I'm sure you can detect, this is a theme that runs throughout everything I've been saying for the past 3-4 lectures. And this is my hypothesis, in a sense, of this entire course. The way I read modern Arab history is a struggle between local actors and external ones. And it's up to you to make up your minds. Who do we mean by local actors? Are we talking about the kings and the sultans and the emirs and the politicians? Or are we talking about the majority of the population, the masses? And I think this is a big question. And I think this is a question around which you can think about the entire trajectory of modern Arab history, especially in light of what is happening nowadays, the so-called Arab Spring. I think I mentioned last week, and I'm going to mention it today and repeatedly until the end of this course, the way I personally think about the Arab Spring is that it's very much connected to the events we're covering today and last week and the following couple of weeks. A desire by some people, mostly in European capitals, to shape literally the countries and the regions, the maps of and the borders of this area we're talking about, in a way that does not reflect much the interests of people living in these areas. So that's the tension. And I think when all is said and done, at the end of the day, I think the question maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years, maybe in 30 years would be, how do we explain the durability of this very artificial system? A state system that reflected very little the interests of people living in it. I have some hypotheses. I'm sure you do too, but I'll be coming back to this question repeatedly. But this is the overarching question that I am personally interested in when I study this period, when I study modern Arab history. Whose interests does this map reflect? That's the big question. And we've been offering many hypotheses, many hypothetical answers to it, to this question. So let me tell you what I'm going to do today, and on whenever it is we're going to meet after the break, because we're not meeting Thursday, of course. We're meeting after the break. So we are seeing the period I'm going to discuss, which is just the period after the end of the First World War. As we said last time, there's 5 new countries that came into existence. 5 new countries. Jordan, Iraq, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, and Turkey. Turkey as an independent nation state, not as an empire. So Turkey, and then Egypt acquires a new status, and Iran. So these are the players. I'm leaving for the time being Saudi Arabia. These are the countries that I'll be talking about, mostly at a very high level of political generality. I'm not going to talk much about social or cultural history, even though this is personally what I am interested in. But I'll be talking about how these countries were formed. And today I will specifically speak about about Turkey, Iraq, and Jordan. And then after the break, we'll be talking about Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. I'll say something very quickly about Iran, a country about which we have said very little. And then after we finish with this, we enter into this very big chapter of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the question about Palestine and the struggle for Palestine, so that you know where we're heading. So today, we'll talk about Turkey, Iraq, and Jordan. And later, after the break, we'll talk about Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, and Iran, and then Palestine. And again, the big question is the struggle between local actors and foreign actors, imperialism and nationalism. That's one main theme. And I want you to keep in mind comparisons. Why did Turkey evolve the way it did? Why did Iraq evolve the way it did? Why did Egypt evolve the way it did? It's really the beginning of these countries as we know them, the beginnings of these polities as we know them. I was having dinner the other day with some of my best friends. I mean, people I've known for 25, 30 years. We had a heated discussion about the revolution that we're witnessing. And I kept on referring back to events that I am sharing with you. And they keep on telling me, Khalid, this is history. I say, yes, this is history. It's precisely why I think Egypt is evolving differently from Libya. I think why what is happening in Libya we're not witnessing in Egypt has a lot to do with what we're discussing, what we're studying now. I know there is oil. I know there is a difference between Gaddafi and Mubarak. I know there is a difference between the U.S. interests in Iraq, in Libya, as opposed to Egypt. I know all of this, but I think the fact, for example, that Egypt dealt with its problem of tribalism in the 19th century when Libya hasn't, has a lot to do with how Libya is evolving. The way that Egypt built its institutions of the judiciary, of schools, of universities, of the press, of syndicates, of a government bureaucracy, of an army, of a police system in the 19th century, when many of our neighboring countries are still struggling to build these institutions, explain a lot of the difference between these different countries and how the so-called Arab Spring is unfolding in them. At least this is my prejudice. I think history helps us understand what is happening now. So with all of this long introduction, let us delve into Turkey. And the case of Turkey is an amazing case of a huge success, but at a huge cost. So let us try and explain how the modern state of Turkey evolved out of, like a phoenix, out of the embers of the end of the First World War, when the empire has disintegrated, and when the heartland of the empire, that is Anatolia, what eventually becomes known as Turkey, is occupied by 5 different countries. The case is so dramatic, and if you were a Turk, well, there was nothing called the Turk. If you were living in this part of Turkey, of the Ottoman Empire, let's say in 1918, at the end of the war, 1918, let's say you're living in Constantinople, in Istanbul, in 1918. There's no way you could imagine that 5 years from now, a new, independent, powerful Turkish state would be formed. It was way beyond anybody's imagination. Why? Because the situation looks very, very grim. This multi-ethnic empire, this once powerful empire, I mean, this is, of course, way, way in the past, 3 centuries in the past. At that time, the war ends and Turkey is defeated. Let me be precise. The Ottoman Empire is defeated. And, sorry?
It landed somewhere near.
It's just passing overhead. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in August of 1920, results in the following. The heartland of the empire, we're not talking about the Balkans, we're not talking about the Arab territories, we're talking about, I'm sorry, this is not a very clear map because the border, the seashore here in this, the Black Sea is not very clear. But this is Anatolia, and look at this. The southeastern part of it is given 2 parts of it to Britain, another part to France. The Italians have landed in the south of the country. An independent state called Armenia is created in the eastern part of Anatolia. Around it also a semi-autonomous area for Kurds is established. The Straits of the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, very important maritime routes, as important as the Suez Canal, are put under international supervision, including the capital, Istanbul, the capital of an empire that lasted for 6 centuries, and before it another empire, the Byzantine Empire, for another 1,000 years. A very important city is occupied by the armies of 5 or 4 countries, 4 nations. And what is most humiliating is that the Greeks, once a subject population, once part of a subject population of the empire, are allowed to land in Izmir. I think there's a picture. Yes. So the Greek army lands in Izmir. They call it Smyrna. And even expands all the way to the north to Bursa, which was the first Ottoman capital, before Istanbul was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. So it's very, very humiliating defeat. And the empire is completely disintegrating. The central authority of Istanbul is non-existent. The army has been completely crushed. There's no political will in the center of the capital. The command center is nowhere to be found. And one could imagine all of these areas to evolve separately as new countries, like Palestine, like Iraq, like Lebanon, like Syria. These were part of the empire. And despite this, something happens. And all of these concessions are reversed. So the heartland of the empire, Anatolia, is divided between different armies, combating armies, the Italians, the Greeks, the French, and the British. The capital itself is divided. The Greeks land in Izmir, a very large city, and a very old city, with a very large indigenous Greek-speaking population. The Izmir, by the way, Smyrna is the paradigmatic city, like Alexandria, like Salonika. Salonika is here, of cosmopolitanism in the Middle East, of different ethnicities, different languages, different religions coexisting together for hundreds of years. So there's a big Greek-speaking population in Izmir, but they're Ottomans. They have been part of the Ottoman. They think of themselves as Ottomans. They are Greek-speaking, they are Turkish-speaking Greek Orthodox. Confusing. They're Turkish-speaking Greek Orthodox. They consider themselves Ottomans, but Greek in terms of their religion. So it's all of these confusing identities. Anyway, but the Greek army now from the Greek mainland lands into Izmir and expands, and even parts of European Ottoman Empire. This place is called Thrace, and it's given to the Greeks. And in addition, a huge fine, the reparations, the famous or infamous reparations, that the League of Nations imposes on the vanquished, on the defeated powers, including the Ottoman Empire. This, incidentally, was also imposed on the Germans. And this was one of the main reasons for Hitler. One of the main reasons for the growing animosity that the Germans felt against the victors. In other words, the victors imposed very humiliating terms on the defeated parties. And the defeated parties are defeated. They have no will to resist. And we see here the representative of the Sultan signing on the dotted line the Treaty of Sèvres in August of 1920, accepting these very humiliating terms.
Yes. What would have happened had the Ottoman refused to sign these agreements? Would they have just been invaded?
Well, they are invaded. They have no option. They have no option. They have no option. This is what the defeat. This is what the military defeat means. Military defeat diplomatically means you have the power to impose your will diplomatically on your vanquished partner, so that there is, you dictate whichever terms. And when you refuse, that is when interesting things happen. In 1967, Moshe Dayan, the main victorious general who inflicted this devastating defeat on the Egyptian army, in a very famous scene, is described waiting for a phone call from Nasser, telling him, I'm willing to sign on the dotted line. And the phone call never came. So it doesn't immediately mean that you sign. But the Germans signed, and we know what happened. And the Ottomans signed, and let us see what happened. The official Ottoman signed. This is the representative of the Ottoman Sultan. So this is the delegate of the Ottoman Sultan. He told him, we have no option. You have to accept the terms. And he goes to Sèvres in France and signs. But things do not end this way. And things do not end this way because primarily of this guy. Mustafa Kemal, who we don't like him that much, interesting figure, controversial figure, not very much in Turkey. In Turkey he is not only loved, he's idealized, until recently when people started raising questions about who he is, what he did, the cost of what he did. Mustafa Kemal is a very interesting guy. Of course, I'm going to say something about him, but I want you to bear in mind that this reversal of fortunes is not only due to him personally. He must have represented something deeper in Turkish society. Between parentheses, I personally think that great men and women are great not because of some internal willpower, of course this is partly true, but also because of the ability to represent and express something in their societies. So what is it that he did? Let us try and follow. He is, as we have alluded earlier, he's a military general, he's a military officer who had been trained along modern lines the way we have been talking for the past few years. He is the embodiment of the successful reformation of the Ottoman military that had been going on for nearly a century. And he was the general who led a very successful military force in Gallipoli. You remember that huge number of casualties, but the Ottomans held their ground and they inflicted a defeat on the Allied troops that attempted to open this new front in Gallipoli. He was primarily responsible for this. And he was the one who led his troops in Izmir, in Smyrna, to roll back the victories of the Greeks. So that is one in 1920. So in a sense, what he's saying is to the Sultan, you signed, but we do not accept. We, that is, who's we? The military, but also society, the people. And he's trying to articulate this new position. He's trying to say there is enough will left in society and in the military to reject these humiliating terms. And his cleverness is his ability to not only build this resistance on military grounds, but also to found something much bigger. And we'll see what. So one of the things that he did is he convened an assembly in 1921, Grand National Assembly he called it, in Ankara, not in Istanbul, interesting, in the heartland of the empire, not in the cosmopolitan city of Istanbul with all its political factions and European interests and the consuls and the patriarchs and the priests and the vested interests, but in the heartland of Ankara is a very old town, but it's a much smaller town. And in a sense, it's in the Turkish-speaking heartland, not the cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multicultural, old center of Istanbul. So he establishes, he convenes delegates from all over the hinterland. I can't even call it a country. It's not yet a country. And he convenes them here, and they together self-proclaim a new state. They say, we are the people, and the power is vested in us, not in the Sultan, not in the clergy, not in God. Sovereignty resides in us. And the government, the government, should abide by our will. In other words, and this is when the new Turkish constitution is drafted. Amazing new principles, very significant new principles. First of all, it's a Turkish republic. It's a republic, not a sultanate, not an empire. It's something called a republic. It is Turkish. It's not multilingual. Ankara is the capital. Sovereignty belongs to the people, not to the clergy, not to God, not to a royal family, a hereditary family. And this Turkish Grand Assembly, that is us, we are the representatives of the people. We are the ones who have the right to legislate. And there is an independent judiciary, not Sharia-based. It's an independent judiciary on behalf of the people. So it's a very serious document. And this is drafted in 1921 after Mustafa Kemal had already inflicting significant military victories, especially on the Greeks in 1922, in Izmir, against the Greeks.
Wasn't this part of the population history?
Not yet. Not yet. This is the following year, and I'll show you. So there is a new political will crystallizing itself in this Grand National Assembly, in this newly constituted republic. And then there is the business, the clearing up of what is on the ground. So there is a new mandate, there's a new will, there's a new authorization for the government, for the military, to start rolling back these defeats. So they enter Izmir, they kick the Greeks out, the Italians, the British and the French. Of course, the British and the French are already very tired after 4 years of gruesome warfare in the war itself, the Great War itself. So they pack and leave. The Greeks also pack and leave. And now there is a new treaty. First, actually, 2 new treaties. One is called the Armistice of Mudanya. It's named after a town in Anatolia that was. Actually, I don't know where Mudanya is. I know where New Mudanya is, which is in the Balkans. I guess it must be in Anatolia. This is not my picture. This is a picture I found on the web. But it's a beginning of a new set of treaties to reverse the very humiliating terms of the Treaty of Sevres. So basically, Greece is to evacuate Izmir, is to give up Thrace. The Turks are to re-establish their authority over the straits of the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. And the following year, in 1923, a new Treaty of Lausanne is signed. This is key. This is now a new treaty establishing in the borders of a newly created country called Turkey, with the recognizable borders that we know. So the Italians are out. The Armenian state that had existed for a very short time in in the eastern part of the country is basically divided between, who do you think?
British and French.
The Armenian state, you're chatting. The Armenian state that was founded for a short time in the 1920s is quashed and is divided between. Look at the map. This is where Armenia was. Mount Ararat, of course, is the spiritual and historic heartland of Armenia. And we look at this map earlier. This is the Armenian zone that was created earlier. This disappeared.
Between Iran and Turkey.
They just killed them all.
They were killed earlier. Between Turkey and the Soviet Union. between Ataturk and Stalin. They divided it. There is no Armenian state. The Soviets took part of it and created the Soviet Armenian Republic, or the Armenian Republic. Yeah, the Soviet Armenian Republic here, one of the Soviet republics here, and Armenia, the other half of it, is incorporated into the newly created state of Turkey. No Armenia, no independent or semi-independent. So look at the map carefully. It's a new state of Turkey being established. They repossessed Istanbul. They retook Thrace, the European part, up here in the northwest. Iskenderun, which used to be part of Syria, they took. And this is a new treaty, the Treaty of Lausanne, in July of 1923. So it's a big reversal of the very humiliating terms of Sèvres.
I mean, how badly was the Ottoman military defeated in the beginning, like at the end of World War I? Because it just seems here that the new Turkish military is very formidable and was able to...
I don't have a good answer to this. I don't know. It's a very good question. Obviously, the army is still intact. That same question was asked in a much more serious way in Germany. The whole position of Hitler and his likes is that we were not defeated. The German army was not defeated. So why accept these terms? The infamous stab in the back argument that Nazism played on is based on a certain assessment of military defeats. Now, military defeats come in various forms. You can have a defeat of the command center. You can have a defeat by decimating the army. You can have a defeat by routing an enemy in battle. You can have a defeat by disease spreading throughout the soldiery. There are various forms of military defeat. And there is a defeat that is based on an abdication of willpower by the fighting, commanding generals when the fighting spirit is still around among the actual foot soldiers. I think if you think about it this way, you can start having answers to the question. I personally don't know. I don't know what the state of the military was, but you're absolutely right that it must have been somewhat intact. And again, you can think about it in terms of the Egyptian army in 67. In the overall scheme of things, 67 was a devastating defeat militarily. But the Egyptian people refused to accept the defeat. That's something else. They said, yeah, we were defeated militarily, but we will not accept the terms of the defeat. We will live to fight another war. So I think this is what is happening here. Okay, we were defeated in some battles, but we will fight to save what could be saved. And that is what we're witnessing. So the war ends in 1918, and this is events in 1920, 21, 22, 23, culminating in 23. Incidentally, my personal story with this whole episode starts in the following way. I was in Oxford getting my PhD, and my supervisor told about Egypt, but my supervisor told me you have to learn Ottoman as a language, because many of the documents about Egypt in the 19th century is in Ottoman. So I had to learn Ottoman. So I started learning Ottoman, and I spent about a couple of months learning some basic, and I knew this, as you will see, I knew, of course, the script, because Ottoman is written in Arabic script, but it's a different language. And then the first big text, and it was huge, that we were supposed to exercise ourselves in translating was something called Nutuk. Nutuk means a speech, simply, the speech. And it's the speech that Mustafa Kemal gave in the Grand National Assembly after the end of the war. And it's a speech that he, I think, if I'm not if I remember correctly, that it took him 5 years to 5 days to deliver. Yes, 5 days, and it was that thick. Of course, we didn't translate except 5 pages in it. But that is my, it was like baptism by fire. Like I had to plunge into a very, very long text explaining in minute details, what happened in every single stage of what is called the War of Liberation. So I have very strong memories about these details and who landed where and who did what and so on, because that is what I had to read in order to be able to learn Ottoman. Most dramatically, after this happened in 1923, Mustafa Kemal and the new Grand National Assembly abolishes the Sultanate. So that institution that had lasted for 6 centuries ceases to exist, and that had a huge impact. And this is a very interesting picture. This is a picture of the last Sultan literally leaving through the back door of the palace and ending up in exile. I think he's buried in Syria. I think he dies in exile. He doesn't go back. So this is in 1922, and now that the Sultan is away, the Sultanate is abolished in 1922, and then even more dramatically and more significantly, the Caliphate is abolished. You remember that the sultans were sultans and caliphs. The institutions were divorced from each other a few years earlier, but now both the Sultanate and the Caliphate are abolished. And this had a huge, huge psychological impact on millions and millions of Muslims. The Caliphate, that umbrella organization that supposedly put together all Muslims under one political entity, is now abolished.
How did the Caliphate and the Sultanate survive the Treaty of Salt?
Sorry?
How did they survive the
Well, they didn't.
No, but didn't it happen right after the treaty?
Well, it's a few years. I mean, this is like the official cancellation. Effectively, they cease to exist. The Sultan is in exile, and the Sultanate is teetering on collapse, and there's no official. I mean, there is an official institution, but practically it is not functional at all. But now, even officially, it ceases to exist. So the Sultanate and the Caliphate are abolished. And now that there's no Sultanate, no Caliphate, a new republic, a new constitution, a new map, new treaties, now is the time to build something new. And the new government under Mustafa Kemal starts a very ambitious and unprecedented program of serious reforms. And these are not only political reforms, but very serious social reforms. The most significant being the language. This is a very famous, iconic picture of Mustafa Kemal teaching the new Latin alphabet. So the alphabet changes. This is, you just imagine if you tomorrow come here, I mean, we're reading in English anyway, but imagine that you buy Al Ahram newspaper tomorrow and you find it written in Latin script. This is what happened. In 1 year, the language of instruction is still the same. It's Turkish, but it's now written in a new alphabet. Why?
To mark a definitive separation from the old and the new.
So this is one to mark a new separation.
There's also, Mustafa Kemal wanted to distinguish between Turkish and Arab, and he was very hostile against Arab culture, politics, etc. and so the new Turkish identity would adopt this Western alphabet, showing.
So it's a symbolic thing, but it's also practical. Yes, there's a hostility to the past, to Arabic and to Arab culture, and to religion as it played a role in politics. And it's a significant mark of a rupture. You create a rupture. Now, let me explain it a bit further. It wasn't simply a change of alphabet. Mustafa Kemal established a language reform society and was put under his personal auspices. And this language reform society was charged with the duty of reforming Turkish. Now, what does this mean? Ottoman, as a language, is really an amalgam, a mixture of three languages at least, of Turkish, in terms of its syntax, in terms of its grammar, it's Turkish, it's very different from Arabic. But then it's written in Arabic script, and it has many, many, many Arabic and Persian loan words. So the vocabulary is nearly 40% of Arabic or Persian origins. And in that sense, that very ornate language that we read in the archives, this Ottoman language, is actually very far removed from the language of, let's say, the peasants of Anatolia. They don't know these Persian words. They don't know these Arabic words. In a sense, it's like the difference between Italian and Latin. So Latin is the ornate, cultured language of the educated elite, and Italian is the vernacular language of everyday life. So add to it, so that is the discrepancy between pure Turkish, if there's such a thing. That is the Turkish that a peasant in a small village in Anatolia would speak with his kids, you know, as opposed to the ornate language of the bureaucracy in Istanbul. It's a very Baroque language. It's a very ornate language with a lot of foreign loan words. So what Mustafa Kemal is doing is creating a new language reform society that not only changes the alphabet, and I'll say something about the alphabet, but also mandates that this society gets rid of the Arabic and Persian loan words. It's a huge task. It means that they have to coin new words for so many different things. And this happens, so new dictionaries, in a sense, it's a new language.
The Turkish still has the Arabic word.
Many still remain, yes, despite all of this. But one of the things that this society does, for example, is to mandate that people have new names, new Turkish-sounding last names. It's what Simon was saying. It's a huge rupture with the past. People change their names, they change their language, they change the script. And the idea of the script is the following, that many of the sounds, the Turkish sounds, are difficult to express in Arabic letters. It's not only the P and the B, because there's no P in Arabic script, but the vowels. The simplest example is the Egyptian word for bridge. What is the Egyptian word for bridge? Kobri. How do you write it? Kaf, waw, beh, reh, yeh. In Turkish, it's not Kobri, it's Kupru. That's the correct pronunciation of the word, Kupru, with an umlaut over the U at the end. But how would you express this sound in Arabic? In Ottoman, it's written Kobri. It's written in what we would, as Arabs, pronounce as Kobri, because there are Arabic pronunciation rules. So if you read kaf, waw, bih, rih, ye. This is how you pronounce it. So there is, and many other words, that the Arabic script is unsuitable for the Turkish sounds. That was the argument. Of course, it's a political argument for the reasons we're explaining. Yes.
Was the Quran also
Transliterated? Now it is transliterated and translated into Turkish. So it was a huge gesture. The significance of it is what Simon alluded to. It created such a rupture that in 5 years' time, the majority of Turkish school children are incapable of reading their past. They cannot read the calligraphy on the buildings of their capital city. They cannot read the newspapers that are only 5 years old. They cannot read the millions and millions of documents housed in the archives. They cannot read their past. That is the significance. If you change the alphabet and undertake these linguistic reforms, you create a rupture with the past. And that was what is intended. Turkey is a new country. It's a new republic. It has nothing to do with these 6 centuries of Ottoman past. These Ottomans were backwards. These Ottomans were the cause for Turkey lagging behind. Now the Turks, modern Turks, will jump over these 6 centuries to go back to their pristine, pure origins and resurrect themselves as a newly founded Turkish nation. The Persians and the Arabs and the Serbs and the Greeks, these were accretions, additions. We have nothing to do with them, and we revert back to our pure origins. It's a very serious gesture. Compounded with it is a head-on confrontation with the religious establishment, no religious schools, complete separation of church and state, quote unquote, no role for the clergy in the functioning of the government. The age-old institution of Shaykh al-Islam, who is the Grand Mufti of Istanbul, is abolished. The awqaf, the religious endowments that used to sustain all these institutions financially, are confiscated, and new strict rules to separate religion from politics. If you want to be religious, you are religious at home, privately, no place for religion in public life. Very fierce secularism imposed by the state. It's not that the clergy are tortured or imprisoned, but they have no place in government. The government is now a secular government, in sharp contrast to the Sultanate and the Ottoman system of government. Again, we have nothing to do with the Ottomans. They were the cause for our defeats. They are defeated. We have nothing to do with them. Now we are a new state called Turkey, and these are the principles on which it is founded.
Was it named after him?
Turkey? No, he's named after them. No, Turkey is an old name, a very old name. Yes.
Well, this is also a question that can't really be answered, but I just don't understand how these secular laws are just implemented and there's no resistance whatsoever. I mean, if not to compare with other countries, but if you would have imposed these laws in other countries, it would have been chaos. I mean,
this is a war, guys. Remember, this is what wars do. Wars and defeats are followed by these cataclysmic purges and societal reforms, and many people end up losing. These big wars and these big defeats, again, between parentheses, I personally think we are witnessing now in the Arab world the results of the 1967 defeat. That's my historical reading of it. And this is, no one will tell you this, but this is my personal take on it. We haven't really covered 1967, but again, these are not simple defeats. Those of you who know American history, this is like the defeat of the American South in the Civil War. It's a defeat of a cultural system. It's a defeat, not a military defeat, not a diplomatic defeat. It's so thorough that certain classes of society are wiped out. Sometimes literally, as we will see. So this is, it's like the defeat of France after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, 1871. It's a very, very devastating, and it's the same time. If you know your European history, this is the same time when Nazism is rising. When the other partner, the allies of Germany, of the Ottomans, the Germans, are undergoing this enormous, painful transition into Nazism with a huge, huge cost. I mean, unimaginable. So it's you're absolutely right in pointing out, how is this happening? How is this happening? The flip side is I mean, modern Turkey would like to highlight other positive aspects. Most importantly, co-education, the empowerment of women, giving the women the right to vote in 1934, and significantly, many of them are not only go to vote, but they run for elections, and a significant number of them end up winning parliamentary seats in 1935. So it's a huge reversal of the position of women in the Ottoman Empire when there's no women in public life in the Ottoman Empire. No Ottoman women viziers, grand viziers, diplomats, ministers, public figures, none whatsoever. And all of a sudden, you have a large number of women in the cabinet and in parliament, in parliament mostly, and in public life. Journalists, poets, artists, so it's a huge social revolution. So this is how Turkey presents itself for many, many years, for many decades. Mustafa Kemal's revolution, it is a very thorough revolution, and it's a very successful revolution. It comes, of course, at the heels of a devastating war. He manages to step in as a successful military general. He seizes the day, creates this Grand National Assembly, and builds a new country. With a lot of people siding with him, but also many, many people not siding with him. So the flip side of all of these successes, of course, is the ethnicities, what happens to the ethnic fabric of the society. This is now a fiercely new Turkish republic. So what happened to the multi-ethnic, multilinguistic empire? Well, it's purified, it's cleansed at a huge, huge cost. The first, this is a very popular image of Ataturk as a visionary leader. The first is the population exchange. So in 1923, with the creation of this new republic called Turkey, that is fiercely Turkish. So what do you do with the ethnic minorities who happen to live at the wrong side of the borders? So this is what happened. This is a very, very painful chapter in the history of the modern Middle East. What we are witnessing here is 1.3 Greeks who lived in Turkey who have to go to Greece, and about half their number of Turks living in Greece who now have to go to Turkey. Now, I have to qualify what I just said, because what does it mean to say 1.3 Greeks? As I told you, these are Greeks in terms of their religion. They are Turkish-speaking Ottoman subjects. But because they are Greek Orthodox, they are now called Greeks. And they are now told they have to go and live in Greece. They have lived in these villages for hundreds of years. They commingled with their neighbors who might have been fellow Ottomans, speaking also Turkish, but Muslims. But now these Greeks have to leave their villages, many from Izmir, and many end up in Salonika in particular. These are pictures of them. Painful marches of not poor. I mean, you can imagine these can be very wealthy villages, can be people like you, who you wake up and you're told you have to pack all your belongings and ride a donkey and march for 300 kilometers or 500 kilometers. This is how painful these things are. Because of your religion and because of the religion being commingled with something called nationality. This is what modern nation states mean. Egypt did not suffer this because Egypt had become homogeneous earlier. In the early 19th century, the minorities in Egypt were... Egypt had always been much more homogeneous than Turkey or Iraq or Greater Syria or North Africa, for that matter. And in exchange, about 400,000 Turks, that is Sunni Muslims, who may have been actually speaking Greek and living in these villages. And I visited this area, and you see the ruins of old mosques next to churches and chapels in northeastern Greece that was heavily populated by Muslims. And now they have to leave and go the other side of the border to reside in Istanbul. So this was a very painful population exchange that resulted in a predominantly Turkish-speaking Turkey that is more than 95% Muslim.
Was it Mustafa Kemal who came up with this idea?
I don't know who came up with the idea, frankly. I actually don't know who personally came up with it. But this is the logic of nation states. This is what happens when empires collapse, whether it's Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Russian Empire or the Ottoman Empire, and in their places arise nation states. And a nation state is built on the fact that there is one nation with one state. That this nationality has to be represented politically in a unified way. There is a one-to-one correspondence. That logic, the logic of the nation state, that you and I take for granted.
People didn't leave voluntarily.
No. They were coerced and, yeah. And it's very similar to what happens, the other famous population exchange in modern history is
India and
the Jews, but also India and Pakistan. 1947, when Pakistan is created and India are created, and many Muslims happened to live in India, and many Hindus were living in what is now called Pakistan. So millions of people, and this is actually recorded in video and in with pictures and moving pictures and still pictures. Huge costs, emotional, psychological, economic. So this is one important glitch to the story of the success story of Turkey. And the other is the Armenian genocide. Now, this is a very emotional question, and many of my Turkish friends would hate me simply by calling it genocide. So what is a genocide?
A group of people kill themselves.
Sorry.
When a group of people with the same background, they just stand somewhere and kill themselves.
Kill themselves?
You get killed.
It's not group suicide.
I mean, get killed.
It's mass killing with the purpose
Cleansing, cleansing.
of eradicating a race. So it's not haphazard killing. It's the programmed, preordained, pre-planned, systematic murder. It's not homicide of one individual. It's a genocide of a genus, of an entire race. So the idea, the Armenians, they're ethnically Armenians. They have a separate religion, a separate language, and they used to reside. Again, the borders are not very clear, but in the eastern part of Anatolia. They claim till today that starting from 1915, specifically from the 24th of April, 1915, that's the day that they chose. They claim that on this particular day, the Ottoman government, remember the Ottomans are still there, obviously, the Ottoman government summoned 240 something leading intellectuals and imprisoned them. But in subsequent months and years, it's not hundreds, or it's thousands and hundreds and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who, and this is the question, they're not simply shot, but they're put on vans, on carts, and shipped and forced to leave their villages and move to certain spots and concentration areas, concentration camps, and eventually either killed on death marches or starved to death. That is what Armenians claim. And they say this is a genocide. In other words, it was not haphazard, it's not a byproduct of a war, it's a result of a government policy to eradicate the Armenian race. This is what a genocide means.
Why did they want to eradicate? Because of that?
Because they thought that this is a fifth column in the... and this is something that started not by the modern Turkish state, not by Ataturk. It started under the Ottomans, 1915. But the idea is that with the rise of the modern Turkish state, 1923, the Turks never really admitted, the modern Turkish state never really admitted that this had happened and continued to deny it. That is officially till today. And until a couple of years ago, it was very dangerous for you as a Turkish individual or even as a foreigner in Turkey to speak about this. It was illegal. You would be imprisoned. You would literally be imprisoned if you spoke about these events using these terms. And instead, what Turkey till today is saying, yes, we know that people were killed. This is unfortunate, but this was not the result of a government policy. There was a war, and in wars people die. And the social impact of it is very unfortunate, but there is absolutely no sign, no evidence that this was a result of a systematic policy.
How many were killed?
Between 1 and 1.5 million.
So what is really the proof that he's not guilty?
What is really the truth? The proof? The proof is living memory. The proof is the villages, the depopulated villages. Like many of these genocides, there is no smoking gun. There is no actual document with a seal that says tomorrow or next year I want the Ottoman Empire to be empty of Armenians. But that same evidence is missing in the case of the Holocaust. There's not one single piece of paper with Hitler's signature saying this, but there are thousands and thousands of speeches in which he gave and many other documentary evidence about. But again, you don't find with the Holocaust documents about trainloads of people. There are, but there is compelling other evidence. So this is supposedly the first modern genocide in modern history, And it's a very contested thing. I just want to highlight the date. 24th of April is a very important day for any Armenian. It's a day of remembrance. And the figure that is usually mentioned between 1 and 1.5 million. And the question is what you have, whether these people were killed systematically or were killed as a byproduct of a war. And of course, lastly, the Kurdish independence, this semi-independent Kurdish area of autonomy is squashed, and the Kurds are incorporated into the modern Turkish state as, Kurds would say, second-class citizens. So they have no right to have their own radio broadcasts in their own language. They have no right to be educated in their own language. They have no right to have their own language celebrated, their own history taught. And we are talking now about 1/10 of the Turkish population being Kurdish.
Why incorporate the Kurds and not the Armenians?
Why?
Why incorporate the Kurds and not the Armenians?
Good question. I don't know. Maybe because the Kurds are Muslims and the Armenians were Christian, and this was a war, and the Armenians, I don't know. But I just wanted to end, I was supposed to cover 2 other countries, but obviously I don't have time. I wanted to end this very successful story of Turkey with these important glitches. So yes, there's a modern Turkey that arises out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire against all odds. Yes, this is a result of Ataturk's personal military and political genius. Yes, the Turkish state appears as a new important player in the region, but socially this comes at the expense of the Greek population, the very significant Greek population that ceases to exist from Turkey, the Armenian genocide, and the second-class citizenship, and of the very important and large percentage of the modern Turkish population, that is the Kurds living in southeastern Turkey. So big qualifications on the success of modern Turkey. Of course, modern Turkey evolved from that time onwards in many twists and turns over the past 80 years or so. But that's the birth of the modern Turkish state. And I didn't intend this to be an entire lecture on Ataturk and Turkey, but I want you to bear in mind how different this trajectory is from what we will be talking about when we speak about Iraq, Transjordan, or Egypt for that matter. A very different trajectory of these countries after the First World War. Do you have any questions about Turkey, the Caliphate? One last point I'll mention. The abolishing of the Caliphate in 1924 has huge significant impact on all the Muslim world that we will pick up when we talk about Egypt in particular, when King Fuad of Egypt in 1925 in particular, 1925, 1926, starts thinking that maybe, why not? He can declare himself the Caliph of all Muslims. And interestingly, that is also the time when the Muslim Brotherhood is founded in Egypt. The Brotherhood. So these things are connected. Okay, have a nice break. Enjoy the Eid, and I'll see you after the break.